If you're a new Amazon seller or a seller doing under $10,000 per month on Amazon, then you need to be checking out this Repricer. Now, for those of you that may not know, in layman's terms, a Repricer is going to be automatically updating your prices at set intervals throughout the day, so that way you can be as competitive as possible. One of the things that I have done on this channel is reviewed and demoed many different Repricers and given you a bunch of options to check out what would be best for your business. But as a newer seller and someone looking to grow and scale your Amazon business, there is one Repricer that has consistently been standing above the rest regarding its treatment for new sellers and its desire to grow with technology and get better and better each and every day. And that Repricer is Aura. They recently came out with a new program for sellers that are under 10K per month in sales and that are new customers to Aura called the Early Stage Program. Now, if you're interested in checking this out, I've got this whole video dedicated to speaking with Dylan, one of the owners and co-founders of Aura, regarding this program, as well as regarding how Aura reprices products, how it uses artificial intelligence, and how it can help you with its hyperdrive features as well to reprice as instantly as possible on a set number of products. But if you are newer, then you want to check out the Early Stage Program at askjimmysmith.com/early stage. That link is below and in the description. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. But be sure to stay tuned for this interview with Dylan because there's so much value packed into this. We talk about a lot of different topics regarding repricing your inventory, how to really determine the differences between repricers and what's true AI versus what's not true AI. All of these different topics are so important. And so let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Dylan. Hey, Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I'm super excited to have you back on the channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been quite a few videos. I feel like we've done at least 2 on the channel right now.
Yeah.
So this will be the 3rd one. And specifically, I'm really excited about this one because I know that we both have the same heart behind the reason for this video, which is on Aura's Early Stage Program for new sellers. So I guess if you wouldn't mind, just kind of let everybody know in the audience here what the program is and kind of why it exists, because there's so much power to this particular program that you've set up. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, no, we're pumped. So as a lot of people know, we spent the last, well, at this point, it's been a few months, but 18 months basically to rebuild Aura, the software from the ground up. Every line of code, like new language, we redesigned everything. And we took everything we learned and we basically burnt the company down in a positive way and said, okay, cool, let's rebuild first principles, knowing what we know now. And we looked at the gaps in the market for us. And on the higher end, there were features that we wanted to be able to support that historically have only been available on higher price tiers. And that was its own thing, right? But then on the lower end, there was a big gap there too. And so a lot of what we did was not just make the product better, we wanted to make our pricing and packaging make sense. And so the first thing we did, our first version of going from 1 tier to multiple tiers, was from 1 to 2. And we intentionally really went on the higher end because we had no data. Like as a software company, when you're making pricing changes, you need data to know kind of what to do. You can't just be like, hey guys, what do you want to pay? Right? Like everybody's gonna say 0, right? You have to look at the actual, and that's just pricing, right? You got to look at packaging too. How do you create feature sets and where do certain features exist and maybe not exist? And so when we came out with 1.0, we had the Pro tier, which we still have, but it was $100 more, and only Pro had access to Maven, our AI model. And we got a bunch of feedback, which was fantastic. This was the whole point, right? We weren't trying to hit it out of the park day one. We just wanted to say, we're going from 1 to more than 1. Give us the feedback. Let's make it better, and let's go from there. And so luckily we got a bunch of amazing feedback, and we said, you know what, let's go ahead and think about how do we structure this based on what our users want and what makes sense for us as well. And we found this good balance. So we actually said, you know what, everybody wants access to AI. Makes sense. I do too. So let's make that accessible no matter what tier they're on. We also started to look at things like the Pro tier pricing. We dropped that by $100. We added a middle tier, and we got to a really good place there. But there's still this empty gap for us where we're like, you know, we've been sellers, we care about the new seller, and a lot of people come to us from other tools that are cheaper, and when we say, hey, why'd you go that route instead of just starting with us, because the feedback we get is phenomenal in comparison to our competitors, they say, well, it was cheap. it's not really good, right? Like cheap is not necessarily good. So we said, well, I don't want you to have to go through that. What if we created something better, objectively better? And so we put our heads together and we said, okay, let's create a program. You know, we're a tech company. We're a startup in our opinion. And all the tools we use have something called a startup plan or a startup program. If you apply to it, you have to be a small enough team, blah, blah, blah. But if you qualify, you just get access to the tool at a very steeply discounted rate for some period of time. So it allows you to get up and running, which is amazing, right? And so we said, why don't we just do the same thing? Let's come out with something that gives every seller, the smallest seller, access to all this cutting edge stuff that historically has only been, reserved for people doing multiple six figures a month in revenue. Let's just give it away. And so we said, okay, it's a program, not a plan. It's 12 months. And basically you have to be doing less than 10 grand a month to qualify, and obviously not currently using Aura. That's the only two criteria. Everything else we don't care about. And for up to 12 months, you get access to Maven, Hyperdrive, which we can talk about, mobile, our support team will onboard you to, all that, everything for $27 a month, right? So for that price point, you can be on that for up to 12 months. If you happen to grow past the 10K within 12 months, we'll actually give you a 50% discount on the first 3 months of the next tier you grow into. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, there's a better entry point now. There's a lower entry point. And as you're growing, we'll smooth things out for you. And so that's what we've been working on. So we basically did a beta test for about a month, and we had hundreds upon hundreds of people come in while in stealth mode, which is still kind of crazy to me. And the data was phenomenal. The feedback was phenomenal. So we said, you know what, we have the data here to have confidence. Let's go public with this. And that's what we're doing now. And so we're really promoting it heavily. And we want people to have access to modern repricing without having to wait until they can afford $100 a month.
Right. Yeah. And I love that. And it's one thing too that I've loved about Aura for so long. I mean, you have been, even right out the gate, whenever Aura came out, I considered a high tier repricer. And I feel like a lot of repricing programs come out and they start really small, and then over time they kind of build a good following. But for the way that you had it set up right away, has always been, like, hey, Aura is a place to go for if you're serious about repricing. And that's still the case. I mean, you've only made it better with some of these things. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit more about those, but to give access to newer sellers to a repricing tool that is typically reserved for a much higher tier of sales, you've got a lot of an advantage as a newer seller if you jump into something like this with Aura. And so I'm really excited for it. It's called the Early Stage Program. And for anybody interested, you can check it out at askjimmysmith.com/early stage. That link will be in the description. But let's talk a little bit about some of those advanced features that you've recently added. So Maven and Hyperdrive, can you kind of go into those two features and why not only does it help advanced sellers, but also new sellers?
Yeah. When we sat down to rebuild Aura, we re-architected the backend, which is nerd speak for we remodeled everything. It's like kind of taking your house down to the studs and be like, all right, blank slate. And we kind of paused and asked ourselves a question, like, what is the problem currently? Because legacy Aura was built, half a decade ago at this point, a little over. So we wanted to start with first principles and say, well, what is the problem now? Because things evolve, things change. And we realized there's two: complexity and speed. You have far more things you need to handle far faster. Okay. So that's what we focused in on. And we found we developed two features that solve each one independently. I'll talk about Hyperdrive, which is speed, because that's a little bit easier for me to explain. Hyperdrive is really fun. When we say instant repricing, that does not mean literally 0 seconds and like it's all good. Instant really means that in our system, we are submitting a price change instantly. We're not delaying you. So if you're paying for anything less than instant, you're just doing yourself a disservice, basically. But that does mean that when we submit a price change, it's going to take on average 1.5 to 2 minutes round trip for that to come back to us and say, that's confirmed by Amazon, it's accepted. So instant really means 1.5 to 2 minutes on average. Now, Hyperdrive is something we developed, which is amazing because we can do that round trip in less than 10 seconds. Wow. Now, we can only do that up to 50 SKUs. There's a technical engineering limitation there. But for your most competitive listings, you're talking like a 12x almost increase in speed, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now, that's speed. complexity is a whole different bag. For us, we were like, okay, cool. AI is awesome. I definitely geek out with AI. I love it. I use it daily in some way, shape, or form. But you have to, again, ask yourself, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then what is the best solution? You can't just say AI is better. It's not actually true. It depends, right? My stepson gave me this cool little rubber duck for my desk. If I say this has AI, is that better? No, it's irrelevant. So you need to pause and again further define the problem. For us, we said, okay, well, in an ideal world, what should happen? In an ideal world, every single one of your listings should have a strategy designed for it, and it should change moment by moment. Good luck. Can't do it. So what you don't need is more strategies. What you need is a model. We're taking a step back, right? It's kind of like, don't look at the tactics, look at the strategy behind the tactics. That's what Maven's designed to do. So Maven is designed to find the balance between sales velocity and profitability. These are the only two levers you get to pull, right? If you want a liquidation strategy, velocity, profitability. In the early days when you first come in stock, it's the inverse, right? You're very conservative. So everything in between here is kind of fair play. To make this simple, we said, well, why don't we start with a model that finds that balance? And by the way, this balance shifts up and down. That's what's so crazy. This balance we call the optimal price. So it's an actual value, it's a calculation, and this changes moment by moment in a lot of cases, kind of like the dynamic max. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So anytime you're talking about AI, you need to be able to say, here's how we define success. What is it designed to do? Again, you can't just say AI, it's not magic, right? Yeah. So it's designed to get you in the buy box as often as possible to the optimal price. Now, the optimal price tends to be slightly higher than the current buy box, which makes sense because you have competition that's going to compress the price. So actually, it should be a little bit higher. So where things get really magical, in my opinion, is we know where we want to go, but what do we know about the facts now? This is so important. What we want to do is we want to understand every one of our competitors. What are they doing? What's true? What's the BSR? Things like this, right? If I do X, are you going to do Y? And so what we can do is we can study your competition. And we know that for every decision we make, what your competition is going to do, every single one. So now we can go from this reactive of, somebody did this, so I'm going to do that. We can transition from that to, I'm going to do this, and I know that you're going to do that. And that's okay. That's second order thinking, right? So we have the facts of what's true. We store this in what we call AI memory. So we have a lot more memory that we're storing. We can take that and say, okay, well, we know what's true. We know where we want to go. What behaviors, what price changes do we need to make to close that gap? That's where things get magical. And what exists here is a lot. And what's nice about the fact that we built this more like a model than a strategy is that we can go in and tweak the model. So like over the weekend, I have a Tesla Model 3 and version 12 of full self-driving became available. So I said, yes, please update the software, got in, and my car was better. Now, I didn't do anything. I didn't have to really learn anything new. That's because that's a model. Now, if you came in and you changed the motor and all that stuff in a regular car, like, hey, like it drives differently, I now have to learn that. That's the analogy between rule-based and an AI model. So what happens in a world where we're able to run experiments on the model and say, let's factor in age of inventory as an example. Did that make it better? Did that increase performance? If it did, great, we can roll that out to everyone. You don't have to, there's no new setting. And this is the issue. When you're talking about updating repricing settings, and especially rule-based, which by the way, tend to have 15 to 30 settings per strategy. Maven has one. But think about this. How do I make a strategy better? I have 3 levers. I can add a setting, I can remove a setting, and I can change the definition of what a setting means. Every single one of these 3 cases requires you to relearn, and possibly I just broke your strategy because your settings are relative to one another. So if I change the definition, I just change your entire strategy. That becomes a problem. So every time a repricing company wants to make those changes, they break something. By definition, you kind of have to. So you kind of don't want to do that, right? But with a model, it's very different. I can very clearly show this model is better than the previous version, and we're good here. And we can just roll that out and say, hey, welcome, here's an email. You're on version 1.5 or version 2, and it factors in this. There's nothing you need to do. Enjoy the added benefits.
That's awesome.
For us, it's technical leverage, right? Like, how do I help sellers handle far more complexities? Because our world's getting more complex. It's going to continue. How do I help you handle more of that complexity by you doing less and having to understand it less? That's impactful. And so I mentioned, rule-based settings tend to have 15 to 30 of those that you have to understand and set yourselves. We call them strategies because it sounds friendly. They're really algorithms. You're designing an algorithm. But with Maven, you have one setting. How do you want to set your min prices? We take care of everything else. Auto max prices, those are dynamic. They change it in real time, just like the optimal price. Everything else is handled for you. And so we tend to see dramatically better performance in people literally going from rule-based, which takes up more of their time and effort, to Maven, which is like a lot less, which is just crazy.
Yeah, so obviously you said that AI isn't magic, right? And so I love the thoughts behind all of that. What happens though? I mean, so this happens to sellers all the time. Buy a bad product. Well, if it's not selling at the minimum, maybe the price tanks. What's your recommendation then? Is it just going to say, hey, the price is below your minimum now, we recommend changing that or checking it out? How does the Repricer act?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's going to still try to operate in the bounds that it's given, right? So if the buy box is beneath the min price, it's going to do what it can, but there's no fixing that.
Yeah.
I like to say there's no fixing a bad buy, right? So repricing, I don't care what kind it is. You could go to the future, bring back something crazy. It's only as good as you're buying. So some of our larger sellers are like, yeah, I just put everything on Maven and I buy really well. And like I put my minimum at 0% ROI because I'm good. So it depends. I've only ever had one person that came through where all of their buy costs were at or above the buy box, and they're like, "What can we do?" I was like, "Nothing." I refunded their money, and they're like, "Well, what tool do I go to?" I was like, "None. Nobody can do anything for you here." So we can't fix bad buys, unfortunately. Wish we could. We're not quite there yet.
Right, exactly. That's why I wanted to at least ask, what happens in those scenarios. But also, let's say it is a good product. You've got sellers, you just said, that do 0% as their minimum, 0% ROI, which makes sense, right? Because if you have high volume, you can't really keep up with all of those minimums, right? However, you do have the dynamic maximums. How does the repricer then respond in those cases? Is it testing prices early on, and then you're going to get more, let's just say, better repricing after a month? Or how does that typically work?
Yeah, so it doesn't take quite that long. It depends on how much data we can get. So in the average case, a few hours is enough for us to figure out what's happening, and we can kind of start to optimize. If it's really kind of a staler listing, it could take up to a day, is kind of what we've seen. We don't need a ton of data, but we need enough data. And what we'll intentionally do too is every seller is in a different life cycle of their products, right? So when you first come in stock, you're very conservative. As time goes on, you become more aggressive. Every one of your competitors, let's say you got 20 people competing on a listing, every single one of those is in a different slice of that phase or of that life cycle. So we will intentionally forget how your competition will behave to relearn it, because it itself can change, right? So we do come on, we start to immediately experiment and understand. One good example of this actually is, if let's say we need to reprice below you and we go 1 penny below and we don't pull the buy box, does 2 work? Does 4 work? Right? We'll figure out what works, and we'll save that only for that competitor, because another competitor, we could probably be 2 cents above and actually pull the buy box. Great. So why would I want to be 10 cents below that competitor if I don't have to be? So we try to contextualize everything we're doing to the exact competitor we're going against in that moment.
Okay, that makes sense, especially since the point of this is about the early stage program. Sellers doing less than $10,000 a month typically have less seller reviews, and they're competing against sometimes wholesalers with tens of thousands or even sometimes hundreds of thousands of reviews. So in that case, is that where you're going to be testing, how low do we have to go before we get the buy box? Okay.
Exactly. And we do it within reason, right? Like that's like an infinitely played game. So we do it within reason, right? Like we're not, like, Maven's designed, again, that balance between sales velocity and profitability. So if we see that we're really starting to tier too far, we'll pull it back. So, there has been some concerns of, well, I use this AI and it basically took me to my minimum price. Like, yeah, we don't do that. It doesn't make sense. So it's designed for that balance. And I think that's why I like to kind of start with, how is it designed? What is it designed to do? Because some people have used what was called AI, which is not really AI. And unfortunately, it didn't go well. And now they're like, AI is scary. I'm like, yes. But if it's built correctly, that's not the case.
Okay.
So, there's, as you're transitioning, especially if you're coming from another tool and you're used to like role-based and you're going to Maven, I never recommend going 0 to 1, right? Don't just flip the script on everything. I've seen that happen and it's been fine, but just behaviorally, I think, pick a percentage of your inventory, 10, 25%, go Maven. Be comfortable with it. It is slightly different. I think this is so important, right? Transitioning from how you think about repricing with rule-based versus an AI model like Maven is kind of different. It's not majorly different, but you got to view things differently. And so one of those examples is the min price. A lot of times we recommend, if you're setting your minimum at, let's say 30% ROI with a rule-based, you should not set it at 30% with Maven. It needs more range. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go lower. It's just, it has more range, because we're transitioning from a world of how many price changes did you make for me and then maximizing that volume to precision. And so it has to be able to push down to pull back up sometimes, right? There's a lot of strategy there. And so we had somebody doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in revenue. They transitioned 100% from role-based to Maven. They're like, I'm just not really seeing the result that I expected. So we jumped in. We're like, oh yeah, let's go ahead and start to lower the min value. And sure enough, in 2 days, things took off. The margin went up, by the way, not down.
Wow.
The velocity also kicked back off, right? So you kind of have to think about, if we have this model and I add a bunch of constraints to it, is it going to perform better or worse? Depends. If you add the right kind of constraints, it'll increase the performance. But if you sort of add too much, it becomes constraint, and now it can't do what it needs to do. And so what we're trying to do is find the constraints that we can do for you, so you don't have to deal with those. And then you allow us to basically have the range, and then we're fine. So there's those subtle differences. It's super easy to get comfortable with it, but it just, for people making that transition, I like to highlight that of like, hey, if it feels a little different, you're not crazy. That's totally normal and expected, and actually a good thing. Because once you experience that, it is a game changer. You really just feel like, wow, I went from this like hard-coded thing to like this level of intelligence that like, I just feel like I have like this assistant that's in there doing it for me, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is. So regarding some of the, I know you mentioned inventory age, that's always a concern. And typically repricers have the conditional repricing features, and you have to set them up that, between these days, et cetera, all of that. So Maven would handle all of that, and kind of in the back end that, hey, we're seeing that this isn't selling through quickly enough. And so Maven's going to essentially handle that from the artificial intelligence side.
That's where we want to get to. So age of inventory is not factored in yet. I use that as an example because like I definitely see that being the case. But yeah, it's like, again, I don't want to add functionality that creates a 5 to 7 new settings that you now have to go and tweak and figure out when we already have the data.
Right.
I can just basically set it as a default that in the data has the highest performance. And if you need to tweak it for whatever reason, because you're the exception, you can do that. And so like, for us, the challenge is, how do we design something that is so complex on our end that we handle the complexities, we set the defaults in a way that is the highest performing, so you don't even have to become a repricing expert. We're doing that for you, and we abstract away the complexities. It's like you don't understand how an internal combustion engine works, but you can drive your car.
Right.
It's like same thing, right? Like that's what we want. And I think for us, it's like we more so want to be the Tesla of it. It's even less complex, but does more. Like that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and you have been consistent from at least as you've been doing the I guess Aura 1.0, right, version 1. You've been consistent with, hey, this is where we're going, and so I love that that's been consistent. It hasn't changed, but that you've also added the ability for newer sellers to do these things. And so what with the newer sellers or even experienced sellers, let's say you're looking at a bunch of different repricers, and the buzzword that's a hot topic is AI. So how do sellers tell the difference between a genuine AI versus the buzzword of AI that can be in a lot of other programs?
It's a real tough one. AI is a very broad term, so a lot of things can qualify. I think if you have dozens of versions of AI, it's not AI.
Okay.
Listen, there's one GPT, right? So OpenAI, right? Are there different versions of it? Yeah, but the new version isn't in parallel. It's replacing the old one. So GPT-4 replaced GPT 3.5 and it was better, right? You got migrated.
Yeah.
If OpenAI tomorrow came out and said, we have GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, you choose. That tells me they don't do anything. Like, that's not the point. And unfortunately, when you have so many versions of AI, it creates a decision fatigue for you because you don't really know what you're doing. And if there's still a ton of settings inside of it, it's not AI.
Okay.
What a lot of people are doing right now is they're taking strategies, multiple strategies, and then putting an if-then statement on the top. That's basically what it is. It's more complex. Awesome. It's not the same, right? Okay. So when you're looking at and you're trying to understand, like, is this actual AI in any way, shape, or form? And that is difficult, even for me. And I'm like in the space, right? You have to be able to ask clear questions. And this is why I like to start with this. What is it designed to do? What's the end outcome? And then what does it factor in to get there? If you can even just answer those two things, you're probably in a good position. Now, where things get difficult is some versions of AI are useful in some areas, but not nearly as useful in others. So you can hear terms like machine learning. Is that better? Depends. I think for what we do, it's actually not better. I think for private label, where you're trying to set like a specific price and your competition is not really factored in, that's fine. For what we do, it's highly competitive. So if you were to create, if we were to take all of our pricing data and trade a model, could it predict a price? Sure. But if it's not factoring in your competition correctly, it doesn't matter, right? And so it's less about looking at the historical of like, well, here's kind of what works, because things change, right? If you have a model trained on a period of time and like the thing it's trying to interact with, aka the Amazon platform itself, is changing, and the model's already outdated. And so you need to be able to be as real time as possible. And it's not about what is historically happened. It's what is that individual competitor doing right now. I don't care what happened 6 months ago. I care about what's happening now. And so depending on what you're doing, you kind of have to think about like what actually makes sense. And I know that's hard, right? Because I don't think the average seller needs to go learn about game theory and machine learning and deep learning and reinforcement learning. You don't need to, but just be able to ask clear questions. And there's some things that I can't answer because people are like, well, what happens in this case? I don't know. I need to see all the data to tell you kind of what would in theory happen. So some things are a black box where I can't just be like, well, if my competitor does this, what do I do? I don't know. Depends. There's so much more, right? Complexity. But I can tell you what it's designed to do, the behaviors it has at its disposal, right? So its tools, if you will, and then how it's going to run its own experiments and understand that and save that to its memory. I can break down the model aspect of it first and foremost. So I think if you're presented with tons of variations of something that seems very similar and they tell you exactly it does X, Y, and Z, it's not quite there.
Right.
So,
and from a new seller standpoint, having one setting that you have to set, right? The minimum price. What do you want that based off of? That's way easier for a new seller to have to get into this. I mean, years ago, probably in 2019, I had a Repricer settings sheet that people could get from me. And it was like 30 different things for how to set up the Repricer. So the evolution of that, the change into what you have now for new sellers and experienced sellers is really amazing. So, and I'm excited too, to continue to see people using it. I've got a lot of people in my audience that use Aura and that love it, but I'm excited to see how, as the AI, the Maven, continues to change, continues to get better, to see the results get better for people too. I'm sure you've seen that yourself recently.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. For me, technology should make our lives easier. I'm a big Star Trek nerd, right? So I'm like, my whole bias is like, no, you build technology to make your life easier, not more complicated. And so if you're looking at something and you're like, that's overwhelming and complicated, it's probably not built well, to be honest. Like, that's just the reality. But no, we in the early days when we transitioned from alpha testing Maven, so internally, to testing beta with some of our users, we saw a few interesting things where somebody would get a sale at like $30 and 30 minutes later get a sale at $60 for the same SKU using Maven. We're like, oh, it's kind of cool. Like, it's not just designed to do that necessarily.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You kind of meant to log. And then as we rolled it out to more people, especially people we didn't like really personally know that are users, we jumped on Twitter. We're pretty active on x.com, Twitter, and we started to see screenshots. And I saw 4, I think this morning, they were like, yep, 60, 90, 80, 85, right? Like back to back. And we're like, oh, this is actually way more common than we thought it would be. Wow. And so even from a behavioral standpoint, it's like, wow, we're seeing people get sales 30 minutes later, 20, 50% above where the buy box previously was.
Wow. That's
like,
awesome.
There's something there, you know? And so for us, it's like, how do we take that and do more with it, right? There's obviously limitations in what we can and can't do, but that's just one thing that like emerged, right? It's like this emergent kind of behavior. We're like, wow, we just didn't expect that. But imagine that at our scale and the impact. We're talking like millions of dollars a month with just literally using a strategy that requires less work from you.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Now for new sellers too, then if they're using Hyperdrive, right? And there's only a certain, you said there are 50 SKUs, I believe, that you can do that
to the top. Yeah.
Okay.
So it depends on what tier you're on. Yeah. We basically create different credits for different tiers. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you recommend people decide what SKUs or ASINs go into that?
Yeah, this is a great question. For now, it is manual. We definitely see a world where you could have one additional toggle that just says auto do this for me, right? Put this on autopilot, and then you choose every hour which, X number need these. But for now, a good framework is just thinking about which of your listings are the most competitive. And by competitive, I mean have the most price changes, have the most competition. My go-to example is toys in Q4. Probably a good idea, right? Where does speed have an impact? And there's some listings where it's like, oh yeah, I threw hyperdrive on it. I'm like, yeah, when we need to reprice, sure. But like, it's just not competitive that like, it's not really worth the credit, if you will, right? So like my philosophy on this is if you have 50 credits and you have 50 listings, yeah, put it on everything. It's not going to hurt anything. But the moment you go to 51 listings, you now have to make a decision. And for me, that decision comes down to where can I apply this where speed will have a positive impact? And that tends to come down to the number of competitors and how many of us are actively repricing on a listing. As that goes up, that's kind of how I would think about that.
That makes sense. So it's not necessarily, oh, I've sold 200 of these things in the last 3 days, so I should put hyperdrive on. Or it's not, I've sold 0 in the last 3 weeks. It's more about, hey, what's the competition at? Where's, how's everything kind of shaking out from that standpoint, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that, obviously for new sellers, put it all on there for whatever you can until you get over that amount. But then you have to make these decisions. So it may just also be best to start making those decisions one by one on this has the most competition or this will have the most competition because of the season. Okay.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I really do love this. Again, you can go to askjimmysmith.com/early stage if you're interested in checking this out. I think really the heart behind it for new sellers is how can we, and you specifically with Aura, how can we allow new sellers to get the best jump start, the best early go as possible? And so I'm really excited for this program. And, I've seen so many people jump into it and just have some success with it. So is there anything else that you're excited about coming down the pike for Aura and some of the changes you're going to be making that people should be aware of?
There's a lot. There's a lot I can't talk about.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, there's some simple quality of life stuff that is just fun, dark mode, all that good stuff. One thing, if anybody's unaware, this is an actual live account here, so it works on mobile really well. So that's all obviously exciting stuff. But yeah, just more marketplaces. Updating Maven's functionality and adding and updating to the model, I think is probably going to be one of the more impactful areas. But also just looking at types of data that don't obviously seem valuable, but we could experiment with, and just there's all these things that you think are going to work that don't, and things that you don't think that are going to work that work incredibly well. And so I think our challenge is figuring out how do we experiment in a way that we can find those things very quickly and then bake that into the model so that performance goes up. That's the big one for me. Furthering AI, I'm very obsessed with it as an individual, and the team is too, but we're just kind of thinking through like, how do we add AI in in every area of the business in a way that actually, again, provides value, not just because it sounds cool and it's hypey, but like, does it meaningfully increase the quality, the performance, or there are features we can build? Like, could you talk to your data? Stuff like that, right? Can I just ask, what are my worst products last 30 days?
Yeah.
So that's exciting. And then looking at interfaces, I think, we're really well known for our product, and like the term intuitive Apple vibes comes up quite a lot. But there is a potential world, because things are changing so fast in tech, that you may have AI generate the UI in real time as it needs to. So you're asking questions, it goes, here's the table. I just created that table for you, right? Here's a checkbox. I just created that for you, because you only need things as you need them. And not to say that we're gonna go that route, but these are internal kind of conversations of, do we go to that world, right? Like, software is changing very rapidly. And I think this is one thing that I'm very grateful that we rebuilt, and why we call ourselves kind of like the first modern repricing tool, because we just literally wrote it from scratch again, is like, we're so well positioned to take advantage of this new technology as things are moving rapidly. So can we. And so right now we're just watching a lot of how things are changing and seeing how the software companies that are experimenting more heavily are doing. And as things emerge that add value, we're wanting to adopt those things. So there's really, it's weird. Like, things are changing so fast right now that it's hard to keep up with. And our challenge is, how do you pick the things that are worth implementing now? And how do you wait for things that are impactful, but are going to change again in 3 months, and it's not really worth building yet, right? So it's like picking when you execute on certain technology innovations. That's difficult, actually.
Yeah.
But it's this massive open canvas of possibilities right now, and it's fantastic. It's amazing, to be honest.
Yeah, the speed. I still remember, what was it, a year and a half ago? Like, I didn't know of ChatGPT, and then it exploded onto the scene. Now everything is about AI. I mean, even the updates Amazon is making, integrating more AI into things, not just for customers, but also for sellers. There's a lot changing. So I can only imagine having something with some artificial intelligence, being difficult to make sure that you're keeping up to date with all of that. So
it's daily.
Yeah, exactly. So what I do have a question on, one thing that I used to talk about is, hey, after you get a repricer set up, you should be repricing your repricer, because there's a lot of back-end management with old repricing strategies, more of the custom strategies and whatnot. So what suggestions do you have for Aura users for what do they have to do on a daily or weekly basis to really keep up to date with everything?
It kind of depends. The introduction of Maven meant less management, right? Because a lot of what people used to do is have 5 to 7 rule-based strategies, and then they would say, okay, well, this listing went from scenario A to scenario B, so let me apply my scenario B strategy, and like, that's that managing your repricer kind of thing. Maven gets rid of a lot of that, not 100%, but dramatically more of it. Now, if you need to liquidate things, that's its own strategy. Maven's not designed to liquidate, right? So you still need to look at your inventory. I would say, like, it's funny. I think if you're getting in there to manage things, at minimum once a week is good to get in there and kind of tweak whatever you need to. Funny enough, most of our users leave Aura up as a dashboard. So we have something called auto refresh on the dashboard. So if you have that enabled every 5 seconds, we just update the data if there is new data. So when we started to interview people, we said, hey, how often do you open Aura? And they're like, I don't close it. It's always on a tab, right? So it depends on how you're using it, I guess, is my point, right? Like, sometimes you're just looking at the data as a whole, like, how are we doing? A little check-in, cool. Or you're going there to find problems, in which case, or you have you have something you need to go do. I need to go update my min price for this SKU. Great, jump in and do your thing. So funny enough, people use it daily. It depends on how, like, what their task is, I guess, right? But at minimum, you need to be jumping in, looking at listings that fit into certain criteria. So they don't have a repricing strategy applied, or they're not using Maven, and then repricing is not enabled. So naturally, we're not doing anything. You want to make sure that every listing is well positioned, and well positioned means repricing is enabled. They're using at least Maven, ideally Maven. I would start there, and they have a minimum cost. If we have those 3 things, we're good. We're totally good. And what's nice too is we really updated the notifications in 1.0. So we have reds and yellows. Yellows are things that we want you to take a look at and ideally fix, but it's not that it's broken. It's just that we think that the recommendations we're giving you will actually increase the performance. And then we have reds. These are things that we're like, you need to fix this. Like a red is you have repricing enabled, but no strategy. That's a problem because you're assuming that it's repricing because you have it enabled. And that's not the case. So we want to highlight that. So if you see a red dot, click into there. You can click on each card and we'll take you directly to those listings that fit that criteria for you to fix. So even at minimum, if you're just fixing your notifications, you're in a really good position.
Okay, perfect. And so for anybody that did need a liquidation strategy for bad buys, what would be your recommendation then? So don't have Maven on and do something different? Okay.
Yeah, just rule-based. What we tend to say there, minimum ROI is set to 0% because you're not worried about making money here. We're trying to get our capital back. I would have it target the buy box value itself, so the buy box price, and then reprice below by a penny at least. Because again, this is where when people are like, oh, price tanking is horrible. Yeah, but sometimes you need to get your capital back. Let's just be frank. So sometimes that's okay. If you're doing that, you're probably in a good position. We have videos and articles on exactly how to create like the liquidation strategy and stuff like that. And one thing I will highlight is our support team. We don't outsource anything, by the way, like nothing in the company. So you're either going to talk to Casey, Finn, or myself. You're going to default to Casey because he's day-to-day on support load there. But you can reach out and just be like, hey, can you add a liquidation strategy to my account? Yes, got you covered. Like we'll do it for you. So we're very collaborative, very consultative. So whatever you need help with, like we're always available to be able to jump in and answer questions, deep dive on things. If you need to be personally onboarded because you're jumping into a repricing tool for the first time and it's a little overwhelming, that's totally fine. Like what we can handhold the whole way through. We'll jump into a 20-minute call and we'll basically take you from overwhelmed and concerned to feeling like a power user and super strong, and you're good to go. So whatever we need to do, we got you covered.
Right. And another note for people, I really do love the emails that you guys send out all the time with like blog posts, and you also do open office hours. Would you mind just kind of talking about that for any new sellers that may want to join those open office hours?
Yeah, so we're doing it tomorrow. So every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST, it's at goaura.com/office hours. It's Casey and I, right? So we just jump in. We'll start with a little content, maybe a topic we want to jam about. But then as people jump in, we just say, hey, ask us all the questions you have. And so it's kind of like when I was in college, professors had open office hours. You could go and just be like, I have questions. They're like, great. Throw them at me. That's kind of the same thing. So, sometimes they go really deep into features of Aura. Sometimes they get really meta on just being a seller and like, how do I solve this kind of problem? And then maybe I'll bring up a resource that I know about or say, hey, go reach out to this person who's knowledgeable in that. So it's just an open hour where you get to ask any question you want, and we're live jumping in, helping whatever we need to. If we need a screen share to show you how to set up a certain workflow or a strategy like the liquidation strategy, we'll do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So cool. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I'm really excited for what this program has been doing and will do for new sellers moving forward. Again, you can go to askjimmysmith.com/early stage if you're interested in checking it out, applying for it. It's anybody under 10K per month. That's correct, right? Anybody under 10K per month. That's the only limitation, and not a current or a user. So somebody that is brand new. So if you're those two criteria, go check that out. I'm really excited for it. So thank you so much, Dylan, and looking forward to seeing all the success stories.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out that video interview with Dylan Carter from Aura. As you can see, there was tons of information regarding repricing, regarding strategies for Amazon, and really even the differences between true artificial intelligence and just the buzzword of AI. So hopefully this video showed you why having a powerful repricer with true artificial intelligence can help you to grow and scale your business. If you're a seller that's under 10K per month and you are looking to get started with a repricer and you're new to Aura, then I recommend checking out the early stage program at askjimmysmith.com/early stage. Again, the link is below and in the description. If you are more experienced and you're looking to start with Aura and you just want to check them out, you can go to the same link and check out their pricing page and everything that could work for your business. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below in the comment section. I'll be sure to answer as many as possible, and anything I don't know, I'll do my best to ask the Aura team and Dylan specifically, but please leave those below. And I hope this video helps you and blesses you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a blessed rest of your week.